Today, I want to talk about how the fingering that you use can have a big effect on the sound that you produce. So that was the opening of a beautiful piece by Glinka called The Lark. And I want to use that as an example of what I've done with fingering to refine exactly the sound and the visual that I want. Now, this is not for everything and for everyone. Like if you're, for example, if you're a beginner, what you want to be focused on is sort of standard fingering and learning that. I want to give you a quick example. Suppose you're learning a piece like this. You might notice that you're hearing those notes get stopped as you replace them. But as a beginner, what you want to focus on is making sure you are placing all those notes before you play the thumb. You're not walking the fingers down. You're getting used to placing a group of notes in advance. Eventually, you can place kind of almost just a split second before you play the thumb, so that the sound of the thumb masks the sound of stopping those notes. But to start with, as a beginner, you wouldn't want to worry about that at all. You just want to worry about that fundamental idea of placing notes in advance. So what I'm talking about here is taking, in this case, quite a complicated piece, though not this first page so much, and I'm, again, polishing it for performance. There's some general principles, I think, in terms of fingering and sound. So most of the time when we're looking at fingering, we're looking at trying to find the most efficient type of fingering. For example, if we're doing a scale, if we're going like this, that's never going to be as fast as efficient as 4-3-2-1, 4-3-2-1, right? So usually we're using fingering as a way to make things easier for us and to sound better and faster and more even. But sometimes we use fingering to control the color of the sound, the type of sound, the quality of the sound. And the slower something is, the more room we have to ignore the efficiency of the fingering and to focus purely on the sound. So the faster it gets, the more we have to be efficient. The slower it gets, the more freedom we have to use whatever finger we want, even if it requires extra work. So that's something to be aware of. Another principle is that in general, the fingers will have a better sound than the thumb. Obviously, we'd like them to sound the same, but inevitably the thumb tends to maybe be slightly harsher, have a slightly worse sound. That something about the action of the finger is better than the thumb as a general rule, as a general principle. And generally the second finger has the very best sound. If we want to play one single note and have it be as beautiful and controlled as possible, the second finger has the best sound as a finger and the most control because it's just a little bit more agile and responsive than 3 or 4. So that's something to just be aware of. And then, as I say, also to think about maybe the visual, because that can have an effect as well. So for example, if we do maybe a different visual and a different sound than going, coming off, for example, can be a great way to encourage the sound to rise and to last both visually and also potentially even if we had our eyes closed. Okay, so what I want to look at is this first page, and what I'm looking at are basically these sort of 3 little slow sections that start each line. And they're quite slow, and we have some room to experiment with getting exactly the sound that we want. Now, if I were to look at this first little 2-bar phrase, how would the typical fingering be? Well, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4, I would say come off, 3, 2, 1, right? So it would look like this. Now, I come off on that 4th finger note, that longer note. You could, of course, for example, do something like 2, 1, 2, cross the thumb over, 3, 1, 3, 2, 1. And if we were playing those sequence of notes all at the same speed, and fairly quickly, that would probably be the fingering we would use. But in this, or I guess we could slide. But in this case, this longer note is a good opportunity to come off. So again, when we get to a longer note, we're kind of moving away from efficiency of connecting, and sometimes it makes sense to come off already. But with this standard fingering, we have a thumb on this B, and it's a bit of an awkward, we're going up this 4th. It's already standing out a little bit because of the rise in pitch, and I just did not want the sound of the thumb there. You can again try and sort of come from underneath this note to get as round and beautiful a sound as possible with a thumb. But I wanted to use the finger, if possible, on that B. Well, let's say we did, say, 4, 2. How do we get to this F? We could do that. What I would say is that feels a little bit awkward. I also think it looks a little bit awkward. It's, especially the 2nd finger coming over like this, looks to me, again, maybe because I'm a harpist and I know that's not very typical, but it looks awkward. So what I ended up doing is I ended up using the left hand. So left hand's going to play this first note, right, 2, and then I'm going to go 2, 3, 4, again trying to avoid, well, this is the right hand, trying to avoid the thumb. And then the left hand's right back on this F. And then, of course, these last ones, I'm going to go 4, 3, 2 to again avoid the thumb. So it will look like this. I can place everything to start with, right? The G, A, B here in the right hand. And I'm going to raise to imagine this note is crescendoing, right? I would like to, instead of just, I'd like to have that note crescendo into the B. Another advantage here is I'm not having to replace on that F that I started with until the very end, so it rings as long as possible. And I would like it to ring as long as possible. I move my left hand out of the way just so you can see. So again, I can do 3, 2, 1, but I want that control of all fingers, 4, 3, 2, and it's convenient because there's only 3 notes, so we can do that. Great, so really happy with that. And then we have this little so we end up here. Just keep that in mind as we look at this next little phrase. So again, if we were doing this as one typically might, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, we have to come off because we're repeating, 1, 3, 3, 2, 1, probably connected, all that connected, right? So it would look like this. Oh, there's that thumb sound again. So perfectly acceptable, but one of the things that I found, right, well, first of all, I want to avoid that thumb sound at the end, but we're coming from here, whatever it is. It feels a bit hurried and rushed to jump down. I want to hang out here. And then it's a long movement to get there. So again, I'm going to use the left hand at the beginning. So we've got the... And that's beautiful because again, we can come off on this first one, let it crescendo, let it float. And then, so what I've changed here then is that this very first note is left hand. And then here it's 4, 3, 2. So I'm again avoiding the thumb sound. Beautiful. So then again, we end up quite high. So again, here on this next little bit, sorry, as high as we can, sorry. Again, I'm going to start with a left hand. Now here, I haven't come up with anything to avoid the thumb here, and I do want to kind of emphasize it. So this is left hand with 2, then a typical 2, 3, 1, which is this kind of mordant style fingering where we have a note underneath it, and then back up to a note, or again a higher note. That 2, 3, 1 is a very typical fingering. I could go, for example, 3, 4, 2, but there's a lot of risk of buzzing if we use anything other than a thumb on this A, because it would be coming from this side, whereas the thumb is coming from the other side, no risk of buzzing. And I think it's also a bit, I do kind of want a little bit of that's a bit accented sound of the thumb, right? It's a bit insistent. Make sure to do a muffle here. I have to do a muffle then in the left hand to make sure I don't hear this C natural pedal change. So I'm muffling here. Visually, it's not ideal necessarily, and again, I don't mind necessarily the sound. It's just otherwise, I'm going to, if the C is flat, there's a chance I will hear that ring. So I'm going to muffle. And then it's funny because as I was preparing for this episode, I came up with a solution I liked, just a small change on this end that I think is even better. So on this end, again, I'm going to avoid, instead of going 1, 2, 3, 2, 1, right? That would be a normal kind of fingering. We would go 1, 2, 3, 2, 2, 1. Great. Instead, I'm doing 2, 3, 4, right? Avoiding the thumb. So we have come off here, definitely. And then I've been really torn about whether to come off so the last 2 notes, of course, are going to be 3, 2. Again, I'm trying to avoid that thumb. Sorry, 3, 2. The problem with coming off is there's quite a risk of potentially buzzing. Like, this is so sparse, so few notes, each one. Again, this is why I'm really being very detailed about exactly what finger I'm using, because each of these notes is so important. So if there's any chance at all of buzzing there, it's maybe feels a bit risky. And in a way, I don't necessarily want this crescendo here. I almost kind of want a feeling of a repeated dee-da-boom, boom, boom, sort of an emphasis, almost an echoed repeat of that note, or just. So in that sense, connecting, even though it's a longer note, kind of gave me some of the feeling I wanted. But what I realized as I was preparing for this episode is I was hearing this E getting stopped. Again, I'm masking the sound of it getting stopped by playing the C, but it is no longer ringing. So what I realized is, and what I want to experiment with, and I think I'm pretty happy with, is I am going to walk the fingers. I'm not going to place the second finger immediately. So I'm going to go. So just listen to the difference of those two. At first, I'm going to put the second finger on at the same time as 3. And now I'm going to delay it. it's a subtle difference, but it's a difference, and I think it's better without that E getting immediately stopped. So so that was useful for me. I'm glad I analyzed that as I was thinking about these three spots and realized I think that's what's bothering me. And so then I can do this fingering and connect, but just delay the placement of two. So yeah, there you have it. Just again, how when you have a slow section where, and like if you go to YouTube, you'll see harpists doing all sorts of different fingering options here that they've decided gets the best sound for them. And so these are just the particular fingerings that I'm using, and who knows, down the road I may change those. But because it's so slow, we no longer have to worry about efficiency, and we get to try and figure out what is going to get the best sound, the best feel of again, as if we were singing, how can we express this music the best, and visually as well. All of these things can tie together and can be really fun and satisfying to figure out what is the option that you want to use. So I hope you enjoyed that. I will see you soon for another episode of Harp Tuesday. Cheers.